before I tell you who I am and what I do, I realized in the beginning that most of you are actually way more senior than I am. So we need to play a little game. I need you to imagine that this is you. You are an awesome team that just recently discovered TypeScript, maybe like 2 years ago. You abandoned your JavaScript code and you moved everything over to TypeScript. And it also so happens that you are working for an e-commerce company and that you work for the payments team. And now the product owner asks you to implement a new payment method, and for that you have to reach out to a partner. And this partner, coincidentally, is Klarna, and they offer an SDK that you should integrate into your code. So you go to their webpage, you go through their documentation, and then you slowly and carefully read this, and then it hits you. This is a JavaScript Runtime SDK. So you take a deep breath and you say to yourself, this is not a problem. We can just, runtime SDKs, they are inherently a little bit difficult because while you're writing your code, the compiler cannot do anything. But there's this awesome page called Definitely Typed, and Klarna is one of the hottest startups in Europe, so surely they publish their types. So you search for Klarna and then there's not much coming up. But then you search again and you scour the internet, and then obviously there are very good developers that publish their own types for Klarna. So you try them out, and then you find out that those are maybe not so production ready that you want to use this in your e-commerce platform. Or maybe some of them are a little bit outdated. And if this has ever happened to you, then welcome to my world. My name is Robert. I'm working in the payment team for Idealo. And what I'm about to show you is nothing fancy, but maybe helpful if you onboard new developers to your team and you have to deal with runtime libraries. Why is this even relevant? We all know what to do. We just cast it to any, and then we can... because it's about developer experience. And actually, I got the inspiration for this talk from Anil. Is he actually here tonight? He is not. Who was talking about TypeScript pitfalls and a great developer experience. So I wanted to go into that, and I want to do some live coding because this is always fun when in the meetup. So unfortunately, I cannot show you any Idealo code, so I had to quickly write my own e-commerce platform, which I will demo now here. Of course, we have the resemblance to create React app is totally coincidental, so don't worry about that. I don't want to print, I want to open the file. What does this app do? So this is a React app. I know there's some React developers here, so it's not totally foreign. It just has some state. It has a success function that sets some stuff, and this success function is passed to an invoice component. Now this invoice component, if you just look at the return statement here, it has this wonderful paragraph, click the link below to pay with invoice, and it has this wonderful button here. And then this thing in the middle, that's the weird thing, that's where we load the Klarna SDK. And this is coming from a hook. This hook receives the ID of the element, and it receives the success function from the parent app, and it returns a ready state and a checkout function that we are using in our button. How does the hook work? Well, this is where we get into our third-party library. So we already know we need to add Klarna to window. And then we need to do some stuff with it. And the first thing we need to do is call payments init on window. So let's actually double check that that window. Why does it always asking me to print? Brave, Jesus. Let's double check that this actually exists. So this might be a little bit tiny. I'm sorry, but I just want to see that yes, Klarna is here. And if I say payments, there's a bunch of functions. You can't read it. It doesn't matter. It just proves that the functions are there. They are on the window object. So we need to pass a client token to this function. And the client token, that's just a aside, we get from a server, because when you're working with payments, you don't want to really make requests from your client to your payment service provider. You should always use a server for that. If you're not sure why, you can approach me after the talk. And then we try to use Klarna on window. And here we have our first problem, obviously. If I just do this, then the compiler will complain because window is an object. It has the definitions, but Klarna, we just added it here. The compiler doesn't know what to do. So we need to cast it to any. And then we have all sorts of problems because now what do we get? Well, first of all, we don't get any autocomplete here. And we can also, if we mess up, so right now this should still be working, but if I accidentally do this, then obviously it breaks and the page doesn't necessarily tell me why it breaks. And here in my code, I may notice that toen is not a word that exists, but anyway. And this drags on and on and on. So here I'm using the load function on payments. I need to pass it some callback. I don't know what the callback returns. Maybe I get from the documentation that I need some sort of show form Boolean that I need to use. And then eventually, if I finally want to click this Buy Now button, and there's a checkout function that calls authorize on the library, I have to supply my birth date here. And then it calls the authorize endpoint on the server. I get an order ID back, and if I click on the order ID, then it opens the idealo job page because we're hiring. And this is all great, but we're basically not using TypeScript here. So what can we do? Well, like Anil taught us, we can use unknown instead of any, because unknown forces you to make certain assertions. So let's actually try that. I will quickly hack together, aka check out a different version, where we do just that. So we start with unknown, and we then have to do a couple of work, a little bit of work. We have to check that the window is actually an object, it's not null. We then actually have to see that Klarna is a property of window, and then we also have to check that Klarna is an object, and then sure enough, the compiler lets us use Klarna here, and we can assign it. And then we just do the same with payments, and then we just do the same with init, and you can already see the problem. This works, but is it really a great developer experience? So the senior guys of you, they will probably already see that this can be refactored in a fancy recursive function, but I didn't have the time to do that. Also, I had to copy some code from not Stack Overflow, but from some other site to use this has own property thing, because otherwise there would be an if statement in a nested if statement, and it's kind of ugly. So there must be a better way. So how about we do this? So in this version, ignore the stuff below. In this version, we can actually access Klarna directly on the window, and the IDE actually suggests that we can use this. And why? Well, we already used some of our own types, and those types are coming from a file where we have our own module declaration, our own global namespace. We have our own types. They're very simple. And then, and this is kind of neat, I also learned this in the last meetup, we just add Klarna to the window interface. So why does this work? This works because there's this thing called declaration merging, where you can merge namespaces or interfaces that have the same name into a single definition. And this comes super handy. It might also get very confusing if you're not aware that this is happening, because suddenly you are adding stuff to the window or to other existing interfaces that other developers might not expect. However, it allows you to actually turn this mess of any's and unknowns into something very pleasant in very few lines of code. So what we have here now is we have our interface with Klarna, which gets a Klarna type attached, and there's a payments type. And the payments type just has an init, a load, and an authorize function, just like we grabbed it from the documentation over here. And for example, the load function, we see clearly there's a configuration. This configuration takes a string and a category, which is one of those two, and a load callback, and the load callback is also typed. And this one also has a response, and the response has a show form Boolean. And with this, if we go back over to how the solution now looks like, you will realize that there is no more casts and no more assertions, no more checks. And the best of all, if I now basically just take this away and I ask my colleague, hey, please can you do some stuff with Klarna? We need this hook, or we need this function, we need this effect, you need to initialize it. Now he can just go in and see, aha, Klarna, okay, there's payments there. And what's on payments? Authorize init load. He told me to init. Okay, then let me actually init. What does it take? Aha, it takes some configuration. So let's actually check what's on there. There's a client token. I remember I used the client token before. And just like that, you don't even have to go to the documentation to be able to complete this. And the best part is, this doesn't even compile anymore. So you get the best of all. Obviously, it's not 100% safe, because if you mess the initial part up here where you add Klarna to the window, then the compiler basically doesn't know about that. If anybody in the audience has an idea how to solve that, I would be super interested in knowing that. But there's that. We have everything here. We can even destructure our arguments that get passed into the callback, and developers can have a super easy time. Also, as an additional benefit, if we look at tests, so here we have to, this test folder obviously was already there from the beginning because it was test-driven development. For tests, it's also helpful because, yes, testing React hooks is a bit cumbersome, but even here you can use the type system to make sure that the library is used correctly. Or even better, because when you're writing your hook, you don't want to test the Klarna library. That's Klarna's job. What you want to test is your code. You want to basically test if you use this hook with a certain with the supply parameters, and the Klarna script loads, then you want the Klarna scripts ready to be true when it is loaded. And if we just go over here and run this, and the testing demo gods are kind to me, then these tests hopefully should pass. Nice. So yeah, do your fellow developers, and especially junior developers like me, a favor. And whenever you work with untyped third-party libraries and you don't find the definitions for that, just add them. It's like 15 minutes of work, okay, or maybe 3 hours, but that will save you so much time. That is invaluable. And with that, thank you very much for listening, and I'm curious if you have questions.
When are you gonna upload the types, the Klarna types?
I knew that this question was coming. So the thing is, I said this is 50 lines of code, but this is, if we go back to the console here, and I try to make this as big as possible, can I actually make this real big? Does Zoom work here in Brave?
Yeah, it should be CMD plus, I guess.
Yeah, it does. Nice. So if we just take a look here, we use payments, and we use 3 functions within payments. But there's credit, there's direct bank transfer, there's direct debit. So there's a lot more on the root level. And then if you look at payments, there's also quite a lot. And we basically, the reason why we're not uploading it is because we're using 5% of the library. And as long as we don't have to use more, it would be kind of shitty to upload an incomplete type definition, because then it just ends up like those other projects that are either not production ready or deprecated, and that's what we kind of want to avoid. I just hope that Klarna at some point does upload the definitions. That would be awesome.
Yep. It might be a hard question, but have you faced the problem when they just update the package and then you're like, oh.
Very good question. So I anticipated that one, and I'm actually waiting for the day that Klarna does that. But interestingly enough, they have so many clients and they're so big. This source where we get the SDK from has not changed in the last 4 years, and the API also has not changed, or it has not been, they were not breaking changes in the last 4 years. We keep adding to it, obviously, they're adding new functionality, but so far there was no problem with that. I will say though, their sandbox environment sometimes goes down. It was down this afternoon and I was a little bit nervous. Luckily it came back up for the talk. Yeah, but yeah, that is a concern. If they ever update this without telling their customers, they will be in trouble.
That's what I was wondering. Okay, cool, thanks.
Is there another question?
Yeah, maybe an answer. So you asked like, well, how you can actually make this like this initialization phase that you have. So you have to do some steps to perform before you can actually use them. So if you mess up there, then maybe the types don't help you. I think there is this kind of type state pattern where you basically produce types where this information is kind of encoded. So it's not trivial, but it's definitely doable. So you say like, I only get this type when this thing has been initialized. And there's like phantom types. So you have some information where you indicate that the compiler, or you give some indication to the compiler that yeah, you cannot use this property if this function has not been called before. So this maybe could help you in this case.
Awesome. I will come back to you on that. All right, then I guess it's time for the quiz.
Time for your present, Robert.
You will find the quiz question maybe not as hard as the previous one, so there should be